Okay, today we're going to be working with the table saw. There's various items that you need to know about as far as identification. This being the table top, this being the table fence, this being the face plate or drop plate. This one here happens to be one of our zero clearance face plates. Make sure that when you pull your face plates out or replace them, that you make sure that there's no dirt on the ledge that it sits on. Okay? First of all, we're going to talk about the left hand. We're just going to concentrate solely on the left hand. The left hand should not go past the front edge of the faceplate. The left hand should not travel with the wood. The left hand should stay stationary, palm down, on the table saw. It should not be back here at the beginning because you're not going to have support on your wood. It needs to be as closely as possible to the front edge of the faceplate. Again, it does not move. Once your wood has been pushed through and is past the usage of this hand, do not put it back onto the table saw any place other than on the edge to hold on. Because if something would happen, this is the hand and the arm that would keep you from falling into the face frame or into the power saw. It would actually push you away. Okay? So, again, palm down, 2 fingers on top, pressing down, thumb and forefinger, 3 fingers pushing over against the fence. Push your wood through. Once the wood is past your left hand, it automatically goes to holding on. That's the extent of that hand. You should not do anything else. Your right hand. To start with, if you have a long board, it's going to start with palm up. And as your wood comes into the saw and becomes a little bit hard to push with your palm up, you need to turn it over, hooking your thumb behind the wood, keeping the wood progressively going forward. We do not want you to come up here and then turn your hand over by taking it off the wood. If you take your right hand off the wood, something happens, you have no control over that wood. You're probably going to end up with a deep sliver in the front hand, your left hand. You're probably going to end up with this thing jammed back into your side. Keep control of your wood at all times. You need to practice bringing the wood up, turning it over, hooking it with your thumb, and keeping steady pressure on the board as it's going through. Okay? As you push the wood through, and you've turned your thumb over, turn your hand over to where your thumb is hooking, you need to step up to the table saw with your thigh. Okay, just belly up to it. You don't want to be standing back here trying to reach out. That angle is very, very dangerous. You don't want to be there. What you want to do is to get up where you're actually touching the saw, touching it, grab the hold. Now I can push right on through. I want to push to the very back of that push of the faceplate. Okay? Do not stop simply because the table saw blade stops here. Don't stop pushing through. What I have is a lot of people getting the boards up here and then they're stopping once it cuts through and that other piece drops off. They just stop and they let the board fall. Now, your catcher should be at the other end to hold the wood up for you. On this particular saw that we have over here, we have an outfeed table to where it just slides right straight on out. The reason I do not have an outfeed table on this saw is that we move it around quite a bit. Okay? Depending upon where we need it and where we have room. Make sure, once again, that you push clear past the end of the faceplate before you let go of it. And let the catcher have it. Okay? The height of the blade. Basically, the height of the blade is determined on how much you want to cut into your hand. Now you're saying, whoa, what do you mean? Well, if you have the blade raised way up, that's obviously very, very dangerous. Okay? I like to have the blade down to where the top of the wood comes right in the middle of the cutter that's welded onto the blade. And on this one, that's approximately 1/8 of an inch cutter head on there. So I'm going to have about 1/16 of an inch above the wood. Now the problem comes in is when you're cutting plywood. If the plywood isn't straight, in other words it's got a bow to it, or your boxcar siding has a bow to it, what's going to happen is if the blade isn't up high enough to compensate for that, for the bow or the whatever imperfections you have, you're going to end up cutting a dado. So take a look at your wood. If it's straight, keep the blade down. If you have a bow in it, you might want to raise it up just a little bit so that when you get to the middle of that bow, you're still cutting through. But not so much that you're running into a risk of cutting everything off. Okay? Okay, one other thing that I want to show you, well actually two. This right here is what I call, or what is called, a sacrificial fence. It's usually put on when we're cutting dados, and it just simply sits onto the saw itself, like so. It usually goes on our other big saw. Whenever we're cutting dados, we can set up a dado head, say 3/4 inch dado head, and we can use the sacrificial fence to cut 3/8 dado, or a 3/8 rabbit. Sorry, not a 3/8 dado, but a 3/8 rabbit. That helps cuts when we're cutting our tenons out on our doors. Okay, part of the blade will be up underneath the wood, and the other part will be running right outside to where you can cut shoulders and tenons all at the same time, precisely, accurately every single time. Can you get me the miter gauge, please? While she's getting the miter gauge, one thing I want to say here, push sticks. Do not be afraid to use the push stick. Use a push stick. It's always better to be safe than short-fingered. Whenever you're using a push stick, you do not put the push stick up next to the fence. And what I'm talking about here is stopping the push stick right up here. What's going to happen is, as you start to push through, this front is going to want to pull away. And that's going to cut a nice little curve in your wood. What you want to do is to try to, okay, if this is 5 inches across here, set it about 2.5 and set at an angle. Not straight, but at an angle. You want it kind of halfway between the fence and your blade, and you want to be pushing that way. not straight, but in the same direction as your push stick is. What that's going to do is that's going to keep the front up against the fence because you're kind of twisting it, you're kind of making that extra little oomph up there in the front. Okay, goes through, and you go clear to the end of the faceplate. Don't stop back here where the blade's at. Okay? Now, with the miter gauge, question?
Yes. When you're using the push stick, I've seen a lot of times like you're holding it down with your left hand, and then once the wood gets up closer to the blade, they let go of it with the right hand, put the push stick on and push it through. What's the proper procedure for that?
Okay, good question. What she's talking about is this was a long board. Okay? You can't put the push stick on back here and push it up. You need to position the push stick to where it can be easily grabbed. If you cannot place it, for example, what I have right here, to where it's set, to where you can grab it very easily, lay the push stick down to where the handle is in this little groove. Okay, that's easy to get to. Now, you're bringing the wood up. You get up here to where, okay, I need to have a push stick. Then you may have to stop the wood. I would rather you get it up here to where you can actually hook this thumb behind the wood. If you can, you're going to have to practice it. And that way you can kind of close your hand and keep the wood slightly going till you can get your push stick back on there and then get to going. If you can, keep the wood going. When you stop, it's going to burn the wood, it's going to heat up my blades, and it's going to make them dull. Okay? Now then, one other thing that I want to make very clear if I can. Table saws in this shop are primarily used for ripping. Okay? Very seldom do we cross cut. On a piece of plywood, okay, plywood's a little bit different, but the general rule here is whatever the width is, front to back, this is about 5.5 inches, that means that's the maximum that from the fence to the blade you can have. In other words, you can only cut out a square using the fence. Whatever my distance is here, that's as far cross-cutting as you can go.
Okay, so
You go any